All right, no worries. How's it going, everyone? I'm Chris Poplawski. Welcome to Capturing Wanderlust, a traveling photographer's journey. I'm that traveling photographer. Wanted to start off just by thanking Adorama for hosting this event, and obviously omsystem for trusting me all these years to push their gear to the absolute limits and allowing me to speak freely on, how I use the gear, my photography, and how I've taken that photography to new places. So yeah, starting off with some quick stuff about me, so you know who you're listening to. I was born and raised in Orange County, California. I went to business school in LA at USC. Did not study photography. Never even really had a camera in my hand in college. And back in 2016, right after I graduated, I worked an office job in marketing, had that traditional 10 days off a year kind of set up. And I decided to take 10 Fridays off or 10 Mondays off, whatever I could do to get a 3-day weekend. So I could drive further and camp new places and hike. Eventually, obviously, bought my first camera. And I randomly came home one day after work and just made that decision to pursue photography. Up to that point, had very little experience with the camera, and I just knew I needed something different, something that was creatively, pushing myself to the limits. And then fast forward to today, it's been almost 7 years, I think. Most years I'm about 6 months on the road, but now it's been 10 straight months. It's been very busy. Um, Accolade wise, I've been published in a few magazines. I've had a couple cover pages on magazines like Condé Nast Traveler. I sell a lot of exclusive imagery to brands with huge campaigns that you never belong, like never even would like know that belongs to me. I've had a few images on airplane screens and directed and produced a few commercials. I shoot pretty consistently for brands like Lindblad Expeditions, American Express, Liquid IV, Yerba Mate, which is a company owned by PepsiCo, Hollywood Racks, Hertz, bunch of hotels like Hyatt and Sheraton, Pelican, many, many more. So I'm very busy in the space of photography. Basically, the way I want to get started is just many years ago when this all started for me. I just remember a few people giving me this advice about picking with a niche and sticking with it. It tends to be a trend, I think, in photography. And I just remember feeling when I was getting started that it kind of made me cringe a little bit. Like, why would I limit myself to just one thing and one thing that excites me? Like, obviously, I knew I wanted to travel, which could have been it. And I wanted to start with landscapes, which could have been my focus. But to me, there was a million things in this world that I really didn't even have time or an opportunity to explore. Beautiful places, little details embedded all around us, animals, brands, people, the ones I love, the strangers I haven't met yet. To me, it's all important. So why can't it be that I focus on all of that within this new career when I started 7 years ago? And that was kind of my approach to getting started. So this presentation is going to be a visual walkthrough. I don't put a lot of words on my slides. I'm just going to give you guys a chance to look at some pictures, dive into that vision, my journey in the adventure space, some stories. I have a lot of questions about clients and how I work with them or monetize them, which I'll get to much later in the presentation. I'll touch on what's in my bag. Most important is I just want to leave you all inspired to capture this world, to remind you that all photography, no matter what you focus on, is a medium of beautiful expression. And regardless of what field you may specialize in, or what you want to capture, what you may be looking to capture, don't be afraid to put yourself out there and just seek moments that inspire you. Because for me, that really changed my life. So yeah, visual story about myself. I'm just going to go through slides real fast. I've been an OM system ambassador since 2019. I've been a long time user of the OM1 system. Recently, in the last few months, I started shooting with the new OM system, OM1 Mark II, which I'm really excited to talk about a little bit and show some photos that were outputs of utilizing that in the last couple months. I travel full time with my wife, Megan, and my dog, Sage. They have been on the road with me all these months, all these years, and we just have such a good time together. They've both become a muse for me, a subject for me, a partner, a business partner, just everything you could imagine. Megan is also a photographer. Her focus is very much aligned with mine, but she loves weddings. She has the same young spirit as I do, inspired by capturing everything around her. I just absolutely love watching her be her own creative self in what tends to be kind of a male-dominated industry. And she's just inspiring women all around her. And yeah, I just, I wanted to put in a slide in here because I'm so thankful to have her by my side, helping me be the best version of myself as a husband, as a creative, doing what I love. And 99% of the time, we travel together. We're a package. Although we both have like things that we individually focus on, we really put our best effort together to bring uniquely curated experiences to the clients we work with and to the places we travel. We spend a lot of time outdoors, backpacking and hiking, snowboard. We're learning how to ski this year, fish, bike. We play a lot of board games. We mutually decided a long time ago that we don't want a TV a part of our daily lives. And obviously, we take a ton of photos together. It's really fun, even when we're not working, just to get out into the camping and out into the outdoors, skiing, snowboarding, bringing our cameras along, and just seeing how creative we can get. I really feel like that's been such a monumental thing that's allowed me to kind of bring these stories to life as we've worked with people and worked around the world. I'm just constantly challenging myself in new environments, and that's such a valuable thing to do when you're taking photos. This is the vehicle we travel in. It makes sunrises and sunsets a lot easier, even when we're at home. It quickly answers one question I had from Yolanda. So, about what time of day do I shoot to ensure I have proper light to get a great photo? So I felt like this would be an appropriate time to answer that just real quick. Golden hour, always sunset and sunrise. If I had to pick a time in any day, I'm starting early and I'm ending late. I think as you grow within this craft and you really, get to know your camera, it's absolutely manageable to be shooting in daylight. You can really walk away with something beautiful at any time of the day, but those specifically, the golden hour, is just what I would choose if I had to do a commercial shoot. If I can control the weather, obviously overcast conditions, I also really enjoy working with. I feel like it can bring some pretty dramatic, sequences to these outputs. I always look for unique moments, no matter the subject. That could be landscapes. Also, I focus on wildlife quite heavily too. This was in the Jigo Kudani Monkey Park in Nagano, Japan. We went on this adventure. We knew we were going to hopefully experience these snow monkeys, but we didn't realize it would actually snow on us. And sure enough, I just saw these parents with their baby huddled up, getting warmth. And I just felt like that was such a unique moment. So wherever we're traveling, whatever we're doing, I'm looking for anything and everything that I will feel like I want to share with the world. It could be landscapes in the Italian Dolomites. We worked with a hotel known as Fristies, and this was just one of the unreal views that you have when you're in the hotel itself. We work with tourism boards and travel related destinations like Idaho Rocky Mountain Ranch. Basically, anything and everything is fair game, as I keep saying. That includes aerial photography. We work with a lot of helicopters. I fly my drone frequently. None of these were with the drone, obviously, because it's a beautiful state park. You can't fly. So stuff like that, when I have the opportunity to get in a helicopter, I love mixing up my perspective, being able to kind of capture something from a unique angle that you don't necessarily walk to. This was from the Wave, Arizona. Quickly going to touch on, as a landscape photographer, a lot of my monetizing comes from privately selling exclusive rights to brands. But within that, I've also been able to start a creative agency. So in 2019, I also launched the Untold Narrative. It's just a commercial team that we do videos and photos, which is how I've been able and so lucky to shoot commercials and get a chance to shoot for brands around the world. Most of that work I don't publish on Instagram. It's all within the website or kind of privately held. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. We get to host photo tours and photo workshops in the Faroe Islands every year. We've been doing that for like the last 4 or 5 years. Typically, we get to have 10 guests out. For me, as an educator, as a photographer, it's allowed me to understand a lot more of what viewers like yourself might be looking to learn. And I'll get a little bit more into that. Lastly, this is kind of where the visual storytelling starts. So, along my path, I've had the opportunity to do some extremely meaningful work as well, and it's not just landscapes and those things. When I partnered with Yachak, who's owned by Pepsi, and One Tree Planted, we spent 3 weeks in the Amazon rainforest. It was probably one of the most impactful jobs I had ever worked, and I didn't truly know what to expect from this. So basically, as you guys know, the rainforest is under this extreme threat from unsustainable practices, intensive agriculture, logging, expansion, all these things. I was asked to go out there, experience this in real time, not even fully sure of where we're going to end up or what we're going to be doing, and just document this wildly undocumented part of the world and the daily pressures of mankind on this environment, basically blending environmental advocacy and artistic expression into a collection that will make the world sit up and take notice of what's going on there. And why I wanted to start with this story to start, showcasing some things is I felt like for me, I go a lot of landscapes and I want to capture these beautiful photos and I want to obviously feel something from that beauty and that expression. But for this, you're talking some of the hardest things I've ever seen in my life. And to come away with a story that demonstrates what's going on there, to capture the fires that are happening and burning down the rainforest in front of us, to work with the locals that I met along the way, it was a very challenging project for me. And I really do think after I work through this, it kind of resonates with what I'm going to be talking about even more. These locals we met with, they taught us how they live off the land and how they're being educated to repurpose the land for sustainable business practices. How these companies like SOS Amazonia and One Tree Planted are placing these roots within the area to allow the rainforest to flourish again. And very few times in my life, outside of just random encounters while traveling, I don't always get to meet people that are so heavily focused on doing that. So it was a real challenge for me to, just basically be a bystander. And what I'm kind of applying to my work now is that sometimes that's the best way of approaching photography, is not really being there with a plan. Is you have an emotion that builds up within you, and you watch what's occurring. And I know that's kind of different than a landscape photographer and traveling, but what I find is a lot of the most unique moments are the unexpected ones, like the monkeys you saw a minute ago, and the sunrises and sunsets. I have no idea exactly where they're going to come up. I'm just going to a place hoping to get something beautiful, and there's no plan, and all of a sudden I'm experiencing this beautiful sunset or sunrise. I really want to encourage everyone that's pursuing photography to really try to enter some things without a plan. And I'm going to get more into that because I'm mostly exclusively a manual photographer. I don't, use tripods all too often. And I feel like being mobile like that is what allows me to capture so many unique moments that I'm encountering within jobs like this. So of course we planted, and we did some reforestation when we were in the Amazon and being tasked with capturing that. I just wanted to do everything I can to find these moments that, invoke emotion, to capture the purpose of why I'm out here and what's happening. So, a minute ago, you see the fire, one tree burned down and one tree not. You see the replanting efforts and you see the growth. And I feel for me, coming out of this project with about 500, I think 500 photos that ended up in the final collection, every photo was designed to capture emotion. And so that's something I want you all to think about as we work forward. We spent a week living on a real life jungle cruise, exploring some of the most remote areas of the Amazon. This was a perfect example of untamed rainforest that's not being affected by these things, connecting with thriving wildlife and more local communities surviving off this land. It provided such a stark contrast with, these events that are transpiring there. And lastly, we ended up at what is largely considered an Amazonia sanctuary, where this lodge lies, which is the Cristalina Lodge in Alta Floresta. Very, very, very tiny corner of the Amazon. It's a prime example of ecotourism research and protection happening within this cause that I was there to capture. So yeah, why is all this important? This resulted in, for me, probably something I'm most proud of in this world. It was called the Reforestation Collection. It's available on Shutterstock. 100% of those proceeds goes towards reforestation within the Amazon. Not only that, but as I've been saying, these projects are kind of what I want to be focusing on in my career. Purpose-driven subjects and things that matter more than a beautiful hike I've long awaited doing. I really feel like being in these moments, capturing something as it just kind of opens you up. It's allowed me to partner with also the commercial side and brands that are doing this to change the world and make a difference. I really want my work to make a difference, and I want to challenge myself and learn new things and capture the stories that are still untold. These adventures are the ones that I reflect on the most. So, yeah, think about that as you guys are continuing forward. Something that carries a lot of depth. It could be rich in education or rich in visual moments. For me, I hold these deep within my portfolio, and I just appreciate them so much. So yeah, that's a lot about me, some stories. But what I wanted to do with that is, as I said, I wanted to inspire you all to get outside. Most us photographers talk about these photos and the technical side of things and how we achieve our most beautiful looks. But I think one thing that can always be talked around more is that if you're not getting out there and doing and spending time doing the things you love, you might struggle, finding passion and inspiration within there. So I would strongly encourage you guys, after this, if you're shooting bugs, if you're shooting wildlife, if you're shooting landscapes, whatever it is, spend more time doing it. Don't get trapped in life and the things that might hold you back. Try to get your family and your kids and your friends and any of those people you associate with out there to do stuff with you. Take pictures of them, spread that joy, spread your interest. I really, really, really spend a lot of time as a theme across my talks of how getting outside really transpires into photography and how much it's opened for me. And for me, obviously, the omsystem Mark II, OM1 Mark II is now out. This is something that obviously, as it has grown and become perfected from the former OM1, having that lightweight and compact gear, that's allowed me to get outside. It's been extremely easy to work with, and it's something that doesn't weigh me down. I cannot tell you guys enough. The people I've worked beside and the big cameras they're carrying around, I know to them it's no big deal, but to me, I just work so fast and I'm so mobile within how I document the world that it's super, super important for me when I get outside to have this type of gear with me. I'm shooting all day long. It can be exhausting holding these big lenses all the time. And even when it comes to the really big telephotos I'm working with, it's just so much lighter than your traditional full frame lenses that, for me, OM1 has been a perfect fit. It's allowed me to get to some remarkable places, especially when I'm doing things like backpacking. I can pack so much more with so much less weight in my backpack that I'm not being weighed down and I'm not being, at a loss for not being able to capture something because I couldn't carry something with me. So yeah, when you get outside, if you're not on OM1, I strongly consider taking a look at that. Because as I mentioned, shooting for me, 95% of my images are handheld. I very, very rarely use a tripod. I feel like it's very important for me to be mobile, to maintain that mobility and maximize the unexpected moments I may encounter. It could be wildlife, It could be, small details. It could be shooting for a brand. I move very fast. I prefer it because when I leave a location, I'm not ending up with this one beautiful photo that I feel captures the place in one specific way. I'm leaving with 10 or 20 different angles, and I love them all. Personally, I also feel like it's allowed me to capture more for clients, kind of maximizing my creativity. Perfect example of this, and actually the first trip I was able to use the new OM system OM1 Mark II. I went to Niseko, Japan. Um, as I prepared for this, it was going to be a snowboarding slash skiing trip in the backcountry. If you don't know, Niseko is one of the world's snowiest destinations. It is very fast paced when you are in the back country because there's just so much snow. There's not always a lot of room to stop. And to be honest, I've never actually photographed in a setting like this, but I felt like it was a perfect place to test the new and improved autofocus accuracy in the Mark II. Uh, it's very much, like I said, a run and gun mentality. So there were times when I would go down this powdery hill, obviously trying to enjoy myself. I'd have my camera around my neck, and I'd fall in powder. I'd get up, and my camera would just be caked in snow. And then all of a sudden, I had about 1 minute until all of the people I was with would come down this mountain as well. So I had to get prepared to shoot. You don't have a lot of time to make adjustments. And one thing I absolutely love about the new system is that it has enhanced human detection now offered. So it used to be bird, animal, planes, trains, cats. Now with the human detection, it saves me a lot of hassle from, making sure that stuff is in focus. It tracks everything for me, even when all this powder is flying everywhere. It it truly allowed me to kind of capture this experience for the clients we were working with, and just leaving with images I would be pretty proud of sharing. I never tried anything like it. So again, this human detection element of the new OM1 Mark II has been an absolute game changer for me. So going back to shooting manual, it's really important to know your hands, because one of the crazy things with the OM system in general is that it's possible to shoot 1 to 2 second exposures with your hands, even more. I've heard some people shooting 7 second exposures without tripods. You're literally just holding your camera. So you have to be able to know what you're working with, especially when you're shooting in low light, and you're not going to change that ISO, and you're not going to, be using a tripod. It's very important to know your limits when shooting manual. So go out, shoot the stars, test it, see how much you can get in focus. You don't have to be shooting this professional landscape or anything along those lines. Just get to know your hands. Put a can on a wall when it's dark out and see how long you can hold it still. It sounds silly. And obviously with things like in-body image stabilization, it helps tremendously. But you got to go out and you got to go practice what your hands are capable of if you're going to do something like I am, which is shoot predominantly handheld. Um, let's see. With the OM system, it's a huge bonus for low light use. It's not something I rely on too often when it comes to motion, but in landscapes in particular, like the photo you see, it's pretty dark outside. It's pretty much the late hour of blue, like late blue hour, little bit of light still left in the sky. We were still snowboarding on the mountain, and I wanted to take some photos of the beautiful Mount Yote in the background, which is an active volcano, or actually I don't know if it's active, but it's a volcano. I still feel like when it comes to capturing that aesthetic, it retains the quality, it's rich in color, and it's still sharp in detail for shooting how I am. Don't be afraid to do that. Your images might not end up perfect in the concept of what you're looking for, but for me, it's not always about perfection. Sometimes it's just about the memory or the mood of that feeling that I'm experiencing in the moment. And I really feel like capturing everything is still important to me. Um, I believe I'm not the most technical focus, but with the new Mark II also, it has now eight and a half EV stops of compensation, which is over a 20% increase from the previous OM1 original flagship camera. So, that those types of perfections within these models is what really allows um, better photography shooting manual as well. So, um, hold on, let me go back. Yep. Um, so yeah, shooting people skiing and snowboarding, it's all about projecting the line of your fellow riders. You don't always know where they're going to go and how they're gonna attack the snow. For me, it's all about relying on your instincts, adjusting your settings before they get going, and kind of being as close to the manual settings you want. For these specific images, I think I was shooting at 1 over 1600 f9, a low ISO around 200 to 320. Um, what helps me in following them riding really fast with all the snow kicking around is also with the improved blackout free sequential shooting. You kind of have some options of how many frames you want to capture. I think high sequential, it's about 10 frames per second. Low is 6 frames per second. Silent is even higher. And if you're, so daring to use the Pro Capture, which has also been improved, I think you get 50 frames per second, or up to 120 frames per second when you're shooting single autofocus. So for me, I was just shooting high. I prefer it in most of these moments, but if it would come to shooting wildlife or birds, obviously that Pro Capture comes in handy. But yeah, so for shooting riders, you have that human detection now, blackout free sequential shooting, and about 10 frames per second with how I was shooting. It was plenty to just project these lines of your fellow riders and just rely on the instincts and camera settings that you set manually. I leaned really heavily into the IP53 weatherproofing. I'm not sure, how much you're all aware of it, but out of all the camera systems I used many, many years ago to today's technology, not every camera brand stands behind their weatherproofing with OM system. Obviously, this is gear that can withstand natural forces, and for me, it's absolutely essential when I'm shooting in places like Niseko. It this especially, like I said, when I fell into powder and my gear was covered, I wasn't even worried for a minute that I'd have camera issues, that something would go wrong. If anything, I just got to get my lens cleaned up. Luckily, I had a cap on, but for the most part, when it comes to shooting in rain or snow or any significant wind, I don't even think twice about the gear I'm using. I just show up and I try to do the best I can to capture what I'm looking for. It really provides me a great deal of confidence when I'm working within these settings. Shooting with brands, I'm showing up and there's not a doubt in my mind that this gear is going to come through as long as I'm putting myself in the positions that I need to work. It has nothing to do with how cold it is. Yeah, so if you guys have the option, leaning into that IP53 weatherproofing is obviously very significant for me. And now let's get into more of the fun stuff. So when I'm working with brands and shooting landscapes and working in settings like this, for me, it's all about telling a visual story. Um, as I also talked about in the Amazon, compositionally, working through what you're dealing with is very important. So as you know, I do aerial photography as well. When you look at these landscapes and you're on the ground and you're snowboarding and you're shooting your fellow riders, that's to me, that's one piece of the experience. That's just looking at the objective of today and I'm shooting people riding, which find some unique angles, incorporate foliage, trees, snow, whatever you can. And then when I have very brief moments, they said I basically have 10 minutes to get my drone in the air. Being able to change the perspective on this abandoned ski resort really, I feel like, brings the experience full circle. And it adds new methods of capturing these experiences into my work. So being mobile and handheld means I don't have to put away a big tripod. I can opt for a drone at certain times. And these are so fast paced that even if you have a few minutes, it will add more to your overall collection, especially when you're working with brands around the world. So keep that in mind when you guys are trying to tell your own story. Constantly be thinking about other ways to captivate it and how you can bring it to the brand that you're working with. Um, One thing that was really cool for me in this trip is post-processing. When it comes to that stuff, I focus a lot on using radial and linear gradients. It's a big part of my post-processing. But of course, the new Mark II has now introduced the new live G&D filter, which had me very excited when I first heard about it. I'll explain how it works real quick. In camera, you can change how you turn it on. You have to go into your menu, and it's a graduated neutral density filter built in. You have three choices: soft, medium, or hard. So you can do GND 2, 4, or 8. Basically, on site as you're working, you have the freedom to place graduation wherever you want. Sometimes, you have to mess with your settings a little bit after doing it just to make sure that it still looks like the photo you're looking for. But on the left, you'll see a perfect example of how the sky is kind of blown out. I still don't mind it from a photo because it was kind of the day that we were working with, and I wanted to shoot all day. But then I took a step back. I found a new frame. I placed a live GND up on the sky, and obviously that brings back so much definition within the sky and within the clouds. I was still able to shoot a fast-paced skier at, I think it was 1/6400. So it didn't limit me in any capacity of still capturing what I wanted. It actually just improved, I think, the final output of how I use live GND. Obviously, it's very early on. What I love the most is that this is the first camera that this will be available in across the board. And I really do feel like with all the AI changes in the camera space and all the things that are changing within technology, this is going to be a big part of the future. For me, I can see myself adopting it, utilizing it, shooting with it more commonly because doing it in post is one thing. You're just kind of hoping that it's going to work out. But if I have the time shooting a landscape and I can swipe that live GND down, it'll allow me to see a final product kind of looking at the sky, and it's very easy to use. I also brought it into Tokyo, and obviously you can see the before and after. We were shooting this alley. It was dark. I think it was like 11 p.m. I bringing that live GND down on the left photo. I feel like it just enriched the blacks and brought a lot of color back into the photo. And obviously, as I said, you might be able to achieve this when you get to post processing. But for me, getting as close to that final product on the spot is what I'm looking for. Also, I'll hit too. One thing I've done is I've set a hotkey on one of these front dials here. So when I'm in the field, if I want to access it really quick, I can just press that. I'll see it pop up, and all it does is it pops up this little. I can go back 2 slides real quick. I don't know if you can see it on here. You basically just take your finger on the screen, and you can see the live GND and where you want it. And then from there, you can change the soft, medium, or hardness. So yeah, I wanted to hit on that real quick because for this trip in Niseko and Tokyo, it actually came in quite handy, and I can see myself using it a lot more because I do feel like it helps achieve the setting and the atmosphere that I'm looking for in my photos. So we'll move on to the Faroe Islands real quick. Being here, hosting workshops, being able to work with skill levels on every beginner to pro. I've realized that a lot of people come into these trips, and I'm sure as I talk with many people around the world, we're all very focused on technical learning. As much as I love it and as much as it's important, don't get me wrong, I just see some of the biggest progress in the path of photographers not coming from understanding how to get off auto, even though that's important and what I would encourage you to do. I see a lot of learning and growth happening when we focus on things like composition. I know it's some of the most basic education that you can possibly think of when it comes to a camera, but not all of us find ourselves to be the most creative. Sometimes we get into a setting and we don't really take a second to look around and figure out how we want to compose something. And if you Google, how to compose in photography, you get like 30 different approaches to master, centered all around different things from symmetry, foreground interest, depth, using a frame within a frame, leading lines, patterns and textures, your rule of odds, your rule of thirds, your negative space, being able to isolate a subject, shoot from above, shoot from below, right to left rule, or left to right rule, and many more. Composition can go so many different paths. But for me, when I'm working, especially with beginners, and I'm saying, hey, let's not worry about ISO, shutter speed, f-stop, let's stick to a very Small rule when it comes to those, right? If we're shooting a landscape, let's try to shoot around f7.1. Let's keep that ISO low. Let's make sure our shutter speed is not gonna, have movement involved. Let's capture it at a faster pace. If I start them there, and I say, let's try to find a unique angle, something we haven't seen before, you can see this instant sign of approval within people who barely take any photos, and they're like, oh my gosh, like this is an absolutely beautiful photo. And then when you build that confidence up and you start inspiring a little bit more of like, oh my gosh, I'm capable of composing an image correctly, you can start getting more and more and more focused on the technical side. For me, I don't know why it's kind of something I've leaned into when teaching composition, but when you know your subject and um, the goal of your image, the goal is to capture everything you see in front of you, or to place a subject there, like my wife Megan that's standing by the waterfall, and you start to learn where to place her to add the depth that you want. You start to be able to step into a landscape and view it differently. For me, it's just been a long time effort of placing subject matter and objects and people for scale. You've probably seen it in my work if you've ever looked at it. It's very common. I love placing small people within imagery. That's all because so much of my work relies on composition, and I'm not always shooting at times of the day where my technical knowledge of a camera will get me much further. I can only do what I can. So being able to place Megan, sometimes that saves an image for me, and it gives me this beautiful moment that might not be shot with the perfect settings. I might have, too fast of a shutter, too low of a shutter, and it might sound silly and it might sound counterproductive to how we all operate. But if you guys are trying to learn and trying to get into this path, I would highly encourage you step into a landscape that you want to shoot, take 10 minutes, survey it. If you're trying to place a subject like a small person, look around, find a rock that's popping up. That seems like a good place to stand in a safe way. Focus on the rule of thirds. And if you're not familiar with that, real quick, it's obviously just you cut your frame twice this way, and you have 9 boxes. That inner line, that inner box, if you can learn how to place a subject within that inner box of your landscapes, it's going to be a great baseline for starting. And as you shoot more, you don't always have to follow that. It's just obviously a great rule of thumb that's been, around for a long time. But for me, studying photographs, you see the lighthouse, you look at it a little closely, and I found a place for it I thought would pop the most. If I got a little lower and that lighthouse was in the sky with an overcast cloud setting, you're going to lose it. It's got to be in a position that's going to pop in your imagery. So again, focusing on that compositional element in your work, I just feel like that is really what's going to increase your bottom line value as a photographer and allow you to learn the most, get inspired the quickest. Always look for your subject and how to place them within a landscape. You can accomplish scale in many different ways, obviously with the drone as well. Having all these little houses in the town of Klaksvik in the Faroe Islands right here, I feel like it brings the size of these mountains into perspective, as well as incorporating the use of a telephoto. You don't always need to be on a wide angle. As you saw with the previous photo, Megan was close, which allowed like a deeper depth to the photo. So you kind of know that you're in this huge place. With this one, you have a small person with this huge mountain in the background, and it makes you just feel tiny within it. So there's many ways to utilize that subject, compose an image, and find a sense of scale. Yeah, so kind of bouncing around a lot. Hope you guys are tracking along well. Next, I wanted to get into a trip I took with Lindblad Expeditions to Greenland. Also went to Iceland. For me, this was one of those other eye-opening trips where I was able to kind of put some new things to the use. So obviously, this was my best friend on this trip. Wasn't a ton of wildlife, but being able to use this 150 to 400 lens, it was something I haven't worked with a lot in my life leading up to the last like year and a half. I think the largest lens I ever worked with was a 40 to 150 millimeter, which is, at max equivalent to a 300 millimeter. Also an amazing lens, and I'll use it for my whole life. But naturally, oh, sorry, I'm bouncing around here. Naturally, when you're able to use a telephoto lens, it allows you to kind of dig into landscapes a little bit differently than you've ever done. You're not just capturing everything. You're picking a different subject, zooming in and finding a frame that you're not necessarily thinking of right off the bat. So let me see what I wrote here. Um, for me, using a telephoto in places like this in Greenland with Lindblad, it kind of dimensionally opened up my eyes. When I step into a landscape, I'm looking at it much differently than the first 4 years of my photography career, where I relied so heavily on the 7 to 14 millimeter. Usually those mountains can be small, it's still a beautiful landscape, but mixing in a telephoto, it brings my awareness of settings, of wildlife, of small subjects in the distance, like you saw a second ago, into a better opportunity of leaving with more imagery. Um, I I rely more on my telephoto more than ever now, and I'm actually quite surprised that shooting landscapes, I'm shooting more with a telephoto. So never be afraid to mix in new gear, new lenses, new things that's going to help you kind of capture something in a way you probably didn't even think of. So for this specific photo, this area is obviously beautiful. It's a very remote fjord on the eastern side of Greenland. It was one of the first places we went, got to step foot in this, new place. For me, I wanted to soak up all the angles. I'm moving around a lot. There's a lot of moments I want to try to compose. And I probably took 50 different angles with different flower, different foliage, different angles in the river, zooming in on the mountains, zooming out on the mountains, having Megan stand on rocks, the whole group walking up a hillside, all these different angles. Don't be afraid to lay down, look for new natural elements, and find things that you can work with to place a subject. I find it very important to, like I said, move around a lot, be mobile, and capture these places like this, which led to a question from Mario. He asked me for a trip he has coming up to Greece. He said, would I prefer shooting with a 12 to 40 Pro or a 12 to 100 Pro? For me, if it were me, I'd be bringing both lenses along. I think in some situations, it'd always be nice to have a lighter setup like a 12 to 40, which I use very frequently. But as I'm hitting on these telephoto points of how I've also incorporated it in these landscapes, if you can carry it and you have the option to switch over to it, I would by all means think about bringing that along. And if you could only bring one, I would probably go with the 12 to 100 because you still retain, your wider angle. And if you don't mind carrying around the weight, by all means, do that. But yeah, so both these photos are very beautiful to me. Adding elements like the plant life, like I talked about in the photo to the left, or immersing yourself in this other photo to the right, which was in Uminat, Greenland. If you can add ice, it's also a form of foreground. I always tend to opt for a lower aperture because I'm moving so quickly. Some people don't like that blurry foreground element, but for me, I feel like it's kind of an immersive element to photos. It allows me to leave with more. Obviously don't limit yourself just to foliage like the greenery. If you can find things like ice, sometimes even using people. Sometimes I shoot over Megan's head and her shoulders blurry, the back of her head's blurry. You know that in this right third of the photo, you have a subject like Megan, and there's a person standing there, but what's in focus is the background. Um, let's see. So we're getting some questions too. Let's see. Just want to make sure I'm answering stuff. James asked if I could talk a little bit more between the comparison between the 150 to 400 and the new 150 to 600. Sure. I have only used the 150 to 600 a handful of times in the last month and a half. really, I don't know why I have just done so well with this camera that I've, really, really appreciated it. From a price point standpoint, obviously the 150 to 600 is much more manageable. It is heavier, not a ton. And you compare it to most cameras that have an optical equivalent of 1200, it is extremely light for what you're getting. I do enjoy the fact that you get kind of an extra 200 millimeters of distance between the two. So if you're thinking about either or, I don't think you can personally go wrong with either of them. Um, I definitely need to shoot with the 150 to 600 more. I didn't get to use it in Niseko when I was shooting snowboarders. It was a little bit too much to carry on a trip like that. But when I've shot some birds, which I don't have in this presentation using that lens, I haven't felt like I'm lacking anything. I still feel like the sweet spot is about the same when I'm in that like 150 to 300 range. Let's see, what else have I noticed? All in all, from a feeling standpoint, like when it comes to grips, weight, it's very comparable. Um, yeah, I mean, I do like that in the 150 to 400, you also have the option of your teleconverter. It's like what is it, a 1.25, right? So you can get that 400, 800 millimeter equivalent up to 1,000. I don't use it a whole bunch, but sometimes if I'm shooting like a little bird far up in a tree, I mess with it because it's, a little bit easier to do that. Um, but from my experience, the 150 to 600 from a price point, you can achieve a lot of the same things that you would be able to with the 150 to 400. So whatever you're thinking about, I would feel confident with either. Um, let's see. I also have another question from Stephanie. Is there any place you would like to capture photographically that you haven't been to yet, and where is it? Um, ooh, there's a lot of places, quite honestly. I feel like I will always pursue what's next. I haven't been to, or we just got back from Africa about 2 months ago. That was our first trip. We spent most of our time in Tanzania, but just experiencing the safari portion of that, with some of the unique landscapes, which I also touch on in this a little bit in a minute. Um, I want to go spend more time in Africa for sure, specifically Nambia, South Africa, other parts of the Serengeti that I haven't been. It was really unique being able to incorporate wildlife and landscapes in one, and working with the travel agency we worked with. I also had to be able to focus on like the cars and the stays and the food and all these different unique elements of the trip itself. So I felt very much in a new setting that I wasn't used to being in. So definitely would like to get back to Africa. The whole country, I think, is such a treasure. So yeah, let's see. I have a few more questions, but I'm gonna keep moving a little bit because I have some more I wanted to talk about. Don't be afraid to change your perspective. I think obviously it's common knowledge. Look for reflections. They can be beautiful and add these beautiful elements to photography. But what I like to say is, as a photographer, if you stand up, you're gonna take so many of your photos in your height. Like what I mean by that is you're gonna be standing in the same place and you're not necessarily going to be moving up and down. You're going to be taking the same photo from where you stand. And we're all different heights. But what we don't do enough of, and what I don't see enough of, is when I show up to a place like Yosemite, and I get to the famous viewpoints that you see 100 people taking photos. You see people set up with their tripods taking a very nearly the same image, depending on what lenses they're using. Some people are wide, some people are telephoto. You just see everyone kind of stuck in this line that's been common knowledge. Everyone shows up to these viewpoints and they get a photo they want to get. For me, I'm going to show up, I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to go walk 100 yards that way where I see nobody, and I'm going to go try to find a new composition. Like I said, finding a frame within a frame. If I can find leaves that everyone's, not even near, and I can kind of immerse that experience in Yosemite or wherever I might be, in this case, Greenland, um, I'm gonna look for it. I'm gonna go where the common photographer isn't. I always feel like that's pushed me out of my comfortable element. And even if there's water that's not still, I'm going to get low and I'm going to try to utilize the ripples on the water as a sense of foreground. I mean, whatever it is, getting out of my height and trying to get low. I mean, I've laid in mud many times in my life just to try to get an angle I like, knowing obviously I'm going back to the car or shower or whatever soon. I would just encourage people to play with their height, get low, walk around, get away from the crowds. Sometimes it can create a more raw and natural experience to your imagery, and it's not something that 100 other people are walking away with if you're in a popular place. Um, I'm always going to tell you, expect the unexpected. Obviously, boats are very common in Greenland. I'm jumping into that in like 1 second. But when you can find natural frames and place a subject within those settings, I just feel like it adds so much more to a photo. And you oftentimes, if you're stuck within a tripod and you're set, you might have to take it off and see if you can scramble and capture something like this, but you can't prepare for moments when a boat is unexpectedly cruising by this massive iceberg you're taking photos of. So for me, again, going back to shooting manual, I just feel like it's a vital part of my work in being able to capture so many unique landscapes as I move about, expecting the unexpected. When we got to Ilulissat, Greenland, which is oftentimes known as the adventure capital, I knew we were going to take a boat out around the ice. I knew we were going to go on some hikes. I knew we were going to go do these things, but what I didn't know is exactly what that was going to lead me to shoot. Um, I didn't know there would be so many boats in this area, little boats with all of this character cruising around. And as we talked about earlier, using a telephoto and being able to accomplish scale, these are the pieces that I walk away with where I'm like, this is what Lindblad asked me to capture. Everyday life in Greenland, what we are experiencing on these boats, what we're experiencing while we're traveling around. You when you shoot experiences for a job, the best approach is sometimes you don't know what you're going to leave with. You don't know what your expected subject's going to be. You just have to be ready for it. So for me, on this ship specifically, I had a lot of time next to a National Geographic photographer. If you know her, Cece Bringbird, she's amazing, a beautiful work throughout a long, long life of photography. And in the past, on that Amazon assignment I talked to you guys about, I had a chance to connect with Amy Vitale, who's also done amazing work within the photography community. Um, for me, talking with them, working beside them, I realized that the knowledge they're passing to me isn't, as I said, technical. It's about normalizing this feeling and embracing the unexpected within actual moments that are occurring in front of you. And it's an incredibly powerful tool when you're working with people within moments like boats in a fjord that you didn't expect to be around the icebergs. Even taking it one step further is, we're going on these hikes and all of a sudden a fox decides to start walking across this massive ice fjord because it's hunting, and that's not a common thing to see. And this to me wasn't the most amazing photo. Like obviously it captures what was happening, but then all of a sudden this fox pops up on the shoreline and it was like a mile away, and I waited 30 minutes and I had no idea I'd get to shoot this fox. It's moments like that when I rethink about these conversations I had with some of the greatest photographers I've ever had the privilege of meeting. Cece and Amy both suggested me, you know what, Chris, don't go into these shoots when you have such an immense pressure on yourself to capture, amazing landscapes and amazing things. You're natural at that. Like that's what you want to do with your camera already, and that's going to happen naturally. You have to place yourself within these moments and you have to be ready to experience things that you're not ready for. And by challenging yourself to do that, that's where you really start to dig within, I think, your artistic creative expression is you don't always have a plan for what your best image is going to be. And why that's so important to me and why I share that so much is that when I don't use a tripod, I feel free. I feel like I can use the OM1 Mark II exactly how it was intended to, light, compact, being mobile, getting out there and experiencing these things in the moment for what it is. And obviously, if I'm shooting certain things that require a tripod, I'm not trying to bash on that in any regard because people create amazing photography. And sometimes, like, going out and shooting the solar eclipse in April, you're going to need a tripod. I'm not going to do that handheld, right? So it's not like I don't rely on these things. But for me as a creative and what I've been able to do with my life, I really do feel like shooting without one has just amplified what I leave with. It's allowed me to shoot for brands and balance that while shooting landscapes. It's allowed me to capture life and life in Greenland and wherever it might be in ways that I never expected. And for moments with the Fox, have your telephoto on. You do not leave that in the car. Find a way to put it in your bag. I just had to upgrade to a 41-liter Wandered backpack because every backpack I've had before that, I haven't been able to fit the 150 to 400 or 150 to 600 in those bags. So for me, I'm not going anywhere without those lenses now. Um, there was some other questions. Yeah, I think I just maybe answered that from Mike. Do you have any tips on how to pack your gear for a trip? For me, I have a camera bag. It's a Wandered 41 liter, as I just mentioned. I'm packing everything. I'm bringing extra batteries. I'm bringing multiple camera bodies. I still have my OM1 from before the Mark II came out, and I bring both of those as a backup. I have a battery in that camera ready to go in case I need to swap and use it real quick if anything happens. I bring almost all my lenses. I have a list of it I'll put up at the end, but it's probably like 7 or 8 different lenses, including the telephotos. It is a lot of weight, but for me, I would rather have it than not. I don't always use all of them, but for me, you just don't know what you're going to experience on some of these jobs and some of these places. And if I didn't have it, I would forever regret it. If I had a moment to capture something that could have been something I was very proud of. Yeah, so I just wanted to share a few quick more moments. This is from Nuke, Greenland, the capital, obviously utilizing that foliage and finding some foreground. My wife was laughing at me because I was just laying in the grass shooting this stuff, and we had like an hour to kill. So I was just sitting there doing whatever I could, utilizing all the compositional elements around me. Um, on this, what I really appreciate is obviously I find a great deal of inspiration from when I'm in remote corners, homes. Oftentimes, I always try to approach someone and ask for permission to shoot it. You don't always need it depending on where you are. For this, I actually connected with a local who walked out of their door when we were walking by, and I found it to be perfect for capturing Uminat Greenland. There's these massive icebergs and these massive mountains, and their homes are built on these cliff sides. For me, it really kind of transpired into what life here is like. And then I even took it one step further with this glacier or this iceberg you see on the right. Everything around you can be something to work with. Lighting is very important. And sometimes for me, if I'm like lacking inspiration or I'm tired and I woke up super early, I had a lot of early mornings on this trip. I try to just look at light and where it's currently sitting. Is it like if I see light hitting a mountain, oh my gosh, can I work with that? In this case, obviously, I don't want to focus too much on like the sensitive topics of global warming because sometimes on trips like this, it can be very, very heavy, and that's not what this presentation's about. But it was extremely evident that ice is melting faster than ever in Greenland. You see it with your own eyes. It's not something you're getting to see in California every day. I had no idea that these scenes were out there until I got to experience it. Melting ice everywhere, receding glaciers, unprecedented views that just you can't grasp again because you're not there every day. We had a glaciologist on board, Andreas, who gave us all these points of reference of like where the ice sheets were last year. And it made me realize something, and kind of the same thing that I found after talking with CC and Amy, and same thing with the Amazon, is that you go to these places and you see all this beauty, but as much as there's beauty, there's also brokenness. And that's a really hard thing to capture creatively. And by following light, as I was talking about, that's what's kind of given me a chance to connect with landscapes differently. It's been a very complex emotion for me to go some of these beautiful places and capture. But when I saw the light shining so heavily off this iceberg, I realized that that this is exactly why things are melting. It's getting hotter, yada yada yada, as far as not getting into the sensitive stuff. But for me, to what I was asked to do on this trip is capture what's happening, life every day in Greenland. And these are the types of photos that resonate with me when I look back on it, where you'd think it'd be extreme cold, it's getting hot. I was in Converse like every day of the trip. So when I look back, it's pretty it's pretty just wild to see that stuff. And then I just want to throw in this one because obviously I shoot our dog everywhere we go. There were dogs all over Greenland, and sometimes it's a great source of inspiration. Before I get into the next topic, there's some questions rolling in. How do you keep your batteries warm in such cold places? Cold drains my batteries like nothing else. We all deal with it. It happens. For me, I just make sure to have extra batteries. And if I'm like out on the deck of the ship and I'm shooting and my battery dies and I don't have any with me, sometimes it sounds silly, but put my battery in my hand. I blow a bunch of warm air in there, and sometimes I'm able to pop it back in and I get like 10, 15, 20 more photos if it's a moment that's like super important to capture. It sounds silly, but obviously being on a trip, you just got to keep them charged. You got to have extra. I try to carry an extra in my pocket in case I need to go from one to the other. Um, it's just an issue we all deal with commonly. Um, Someone asked, do you shoot more in high res mode or in normal resolution? I actually don't use high res mode very much, not because I don't like it, but most of the time, like I kind of talked about in that remote fjord in Greenland, I try to leave with 50 photos instead of just that one. If I'm experiencing something that's just like, wow, I'm happy with this one composition and this is what I want, I'll go into high res mode and get some of those larger files to work with in post and kind of get a little bit more out of it. But more times than not, you can find me just parked in normal resolution, working my manual settings, and just being more mobile than anything. I want to be able to move around a lot. Um, Another question, do you see what is before your eyes or something it could become before you take the shot? That's a great question. When I'm in places like the Faroe Islands and I've spent, 8 trips there and I've spent 4 months of my time documenting some of these landscapes multiple times, um, I have visions of what I would like to do in those locations before I ever get back. Or sometimes I don't get to do it or don't get the light I want after like a 10-mile hike. So I kind of have a vision of what I want beforehand. Sounds silly, but early on when I had Instagram, inspiration, that was the only thing I was working off. You're looking at photos you see, and so much of me was like, I'm gonna go take that same exact photo. But then I started realizing that, like, obviously that's not fun. That's not what you want to do when you're taking photos. So I started looking at photos and saying, you know what? It would be so different if I could shoot X, Y, and Z there. A boat, a bird, a person standing on a different rock I'd never seen. Can you climb to that spot? Like you kind of assess it in a fun way of how you'd like to be creative when you arrive. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But for me, when I show up, I try to take at least 5 to 10 minutes and just look at a location, unless it's like right in the heart of golden hour. I try to figure out where I want to place someone. If Sage is our dog is with us, I'll put her somewhere. I'll try to mix in as many things as I can just to try to get creative. And there's many times where I'm just like, I'm using my telephoto, I'm placing a subject, and all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, like I could shoot that way differently. Like, let me try this real quick. Do I have time? Can I do that? So very much I try to be flexible and work within the moment as it comes. And if I see something I like, I'll continue working with it as much as possible. Especially if I feel like it's something I've never seen before. There was a photo earlier too I missed. It was, what custom settings do you have set up for the OM1 custom mode for landscape and or cityscape? Um, that's a good question. I have set custom settings multiple times. Um, but if I'm being completely honest, I just show up, I keep it on M, I almost leave it on M, and I try to just get to where I am. I think one of the more unique things I maybe do that's not very common is I shoot 95% of my imagery on a white balance of cloudy. I really like that little yellow hint it brings to my photos, even on overcast days. And oftentimes, I was going to talk about some post stuff later. I'm not sure how much time I have left, but um, I really focus on my greens and yellows in my work. I feel like it's a very important thing that I've been able to do across the board. So when I'm shooting and I'm using, cloudy as a white balance, it kind of helps me get that natural yellow and green that I'm looking for. And outside of that, I mean, full manual, I try to start with 7.1 aperture if I can, and if I'm shooting landscapes, but I am not afraid to shoot a landscape in blue hour at a 1.2 aperture or a 2.8 where most lenses bring you down to. It does not bother me to shoot low. And I know it goes against common trend where it's like, oh, that whole landscape might not be perfectly in focus, or your foreground or person you're utilizing as a subject. You're going to have to pick if your subject's in perfect focus and your background's in perfect focus and whatnot. But sometimes for me, it's not about a perfect image, like I've mentioned. It's about capturing a moment and a memory and the mood that is right in front of you. And if I had to leave a location with a perfect photo or a photo that means a lot to me because I was able to capture it, I'm always going for the later because it's just more important to me. It sounds silly, but if I have the chance to get a perfect image, I'll get it. But it's not all about that for me. It's just about being out there shooting, getting outside, and doing that stuff for fun also. Um, I think the resolution was pretty low on this, but let's see. I have a lot of questions coming in. I want to make sure to get to all you guys as I go. Let's see. So for I had a lot of questions before this presentation about how I monetize my career, how I work with travel brands, how I make money doing this. I going back to the like pick your niche. I have things that are very niche based that I focus on, but honestly, I have a wide variety of focuses of revenue streams of things that I shoot that bring in money. But to start a little bit on that topic, I got to go on safari in Africa, as I mentioned, and we worked with a travel agency known as Molatini. Um, Basically, it was kind of the same thing, document the experience they provide alongside beautiful properties while being on safari, capture everything you can. And outside of like those one-off wildlife moments, I've never really had a bunch of jobs that focused on an abundance of wildlife encounters. So for me, stepping foot into it, having this 150 to 400, it's a new challenge. It's something that excites me. I reflect back on those conversations with CC and Amy, and I'm like, I I'm not afraid of it anymore. I'm not afraid of entering a job I might not be fully equipped for, but I know I have the gear I need and I know I have a creative vision. You just go for it sometimes, and it helps you prepare and adapt for these future moments. Which is like, recently in the last year, I've had this like extreme interest in bird life and wildlife, especially. Obviously, it was very abundant in Africa, but being traveling full time, sometimes I'm on a job for 4 days and then we're driving for the next day to get to the next state or wherever we're at. And I'm like, hey, do you want to stop in this like wildlife refuge and go see if we can shoot some owls or some birds or whatever it might be? It's kind of funny how it's like taking me down this new path, but it kind of reminds me of my whole career and how it started for me. I am not a pro wildlife photographer like my colleagues. I mean, like you look at like Brooke Bartleson, who I've always talked to and had being a part of this ambassador program for a while next to each other, and you just see her work, and I'm like, by no means on the level as Brooke, but I have an interest in documenting it, which I feel like is monumentally important for anyone trying to go shoot. It goes back to that theme. Like, I just want to be using my camera and getting outside. I want to unlock more of that connection to wildlife because in 2 years, that might become another job like I had on this safari that's really important to me. So I'm not going to limit myself to any niche. Like I'm not going to do that. It's also why I've been leaning into my telephoto. I'm going to figure out how to adapt, and I'm going to use my creativity and what's at my disposal from a gear standpoint, and I'm going to use it for all the jobs and means necessary. I have it later as another slide, but I'm going to say it now. One of the first jobs I ever worked was for a local rim company, and it was a $200 job. I knew it wasn't my future. But when one of my first jobs paid ever, I was like, I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to show up. I'm going to do my best. And since then, I've been able to work with cars, electric bikes, golf carts, all of which have some aspect of shooting rims and wheels for output imagery on the commercial side of work. But as I'm talking about birds and wildlife and why it's important is I'm challenging myself now in these jobs to shoot good quality stuff because at some point in life, it's going to be applicable. And sometimes we show up to a location and it's like, hey, I'm going to shoot a sunset here. Cool. If you have stuff to work with, brands that you can shoot a spec video or photo set for, even if you're never going to give it to them, at least you're learning how to apply yourself to that art and giving yourself a head start for what you're working towards. If you want to do this full time or work with companies, you, showing up, you can do it. You can do it without ever shooting something ever, but it does help to have prior experience shooting things that are similar. Um, for example, so like when I approached Molatini with my wife Megan, I always think to myself like, what makes me different? Like, if I'm going to be pitching to work with this company, what makes me different? For one, I've worked at a high level in the travel space for a long time, especially when it comes to destinations. So my portfolio, doing all these things I've done, matches what a tourism brand usually needs. So if you're looking to get into the travel space and with tourism, you know, focus on those things. Focus on what you need to capture an experience. Like even if you're in Austin, Texas, and you're spending time in the city, do things that are out of the norm for you. Go shoot the cityscape. Go shoot the food. Go shoot the buildings at night or the cool bar scene you might be in. Whatever it is, you can have a camera with that 12 to 40, that lightweight setup that's not really, you know, ruining anyone's day by carrying it, and you can take a few photos. I try to personally avoid comparisons to other creatives. So like when a brand says, "Hey, this guy gave me 100 photos, can you do that too?" I try to have a very communicative conversation about like, "Hey, maybe, but that's not what this is about for me. Like you have to look at what I've done. You have to know I'm going to do what's unique to you. And I want to work off my baseline, not what other creatives are doing to set a standard in this industry, because we're all different. We all do things a little differently. So I personally want to leverage the content that I'd provide and I want to focus on. And sometimes that involves shooting food. It's not my specialty. It's not something I'm perfect at. But again, sometimes brands aren't looking for the perfect website photo of food. They're looking for social media photos that captures what you ate in just like a flavorful meal. And it sounds silly and it sounds probably way different than what you guys expected to hear about a traveling photographer, but my line of work in the travel field requires me to do stuff like this. And I want to be able to be equipped with at least doing it on a semi decent level. So when you're getting an album of 80 landscapes, you might get some food and you might get some people and your employees and all these things as well. And for them, it feels more well-rounded because they're not hiring a landscape photographer. They're hiring an adventure experience photographer that travels. So for me, one little tip I would give you if you're pursuing stuff like that is focus on the outreach. It's going to take a lot of it. You're going to need to make some travel connections that come full circle later in life. And most importantly, you have to be able to take a no. Uh, Early on, you're going to get no, 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 we're not interested, not today, maybe next time, all these different responses that are going to hit you right where it hurts, but you got to program yourself to keep going. You got to shrug it off. And if your photography is your motivation to go get somewhere, just keep at it. Keep at it for years. Like Africa was a dream of mine 4 years ago. And I said I would go when I get a client that lines up with what I want to do. And it happened this year. It doesn't always happen at the timeline that you want, but you can get some amazing places when you stay persistent, when you can just accept that no for what it is and use it as motivation. It's kind of like how all athletes work, right? If you're playing basketball, you have two options when you shoot the ball. You're either going to miss or you're going to make it. And either way, you got to shoot again. So, take the no and try again. Um, let's see. I have a few more slides, but I know there's some questions piling up. Mad said, "How do you keep your batteries warm in such cold places?" I answered that. Do you shoot more in high res? Okay, so I've got to scroll down a little bit. What adjustments do you make for shooting in the snow? Obviously, I'm on Africa right now, but whites tend to be a lot brighter. So with my white balance, I might specifically keep it colder, not shooting on cloudy. Because depending on the light, you can blow out your whites really quickly. So you really want to be paying attention to your meter and making sure that you're, exposing it correctly, and you're not losing all that detail within the snow. For me, cameras, especially the Mark II, they're getting so advanced now that even if you're a little overexposed, you can still pull out some pretty cool images, when you just crop in. You have a lot of room to work with. So that's one thing to consider is obviously just trust your gear. For me, what else when I'm shooting in snow? In my drone photography, specifically shooting in snow, I usually use gradients, some filters that I put on, go a stop down like ND8. For my camera, I don't tend to deviate too far as like ISO and shutter goes because your shutter, if I'm shooting like skiers and snowboarders, you've got to be at a high, fast-paced shutter anyways. But I want to be pretty mindful of shooting with a higher f-stop, getting that aperture where you need it because there's a lot of little details in snow, and if you're trying to not lose it, you got to pay attention to your aperture. Do I have any suggestions for meeting, connecting with other landscape travel photographers? Instagram, it's always been a huge thing for me. Just talk with people, comment, don't be afraid to send a message. Sometimes it's hard, like for me to respond to everybody because I try to stay busy, not just within, photography, but I like to do a lot in the outdoors and just keep myself out there. So be patient, don't take it personal again if somebody doesn't respond right away. Everyone's busy and you might be too. But don't be afraid to DM people, ask questions. I get a lot of questions where it's like, "Hey, how do you make money?" And to me, that's a loaded answer that I don't have time to give this very elaborate answer to in a DM. So, joining sessions like this can help just gain that knowledge. And then attending like workshops. I've had a lot of photographers that, have reached out to me and attend these workshops that we do in the Faroe Islands. And we're all like-minded people, 10 of us shooting together for 5 straight days. It's really fun. Really cool to meet people from all experience levels for them as well. And once you start meeting people, that it's kind of like a trickle down effect. You're just going to meet more. And more importantly, go outside. If you get outside and you're trying to shoot, you're going to meet people while you're doing it, especially if you're going to like half down. Don't be afraid to start a conversation. You'll know pretty quickly, just like you would in any normal social gathering, if someone's going to entertain a conversation or not. So go out there, put yourself out there, get involved in the community and the places that people are shooting. For me, getting into birds. I'm using these new apps, Merlins and eBird, and it helps me identify locations that are common, like birding locations. And I've just met some pretty cool people just out in the field because I found a random spot off the highway that people tend to go see birds. And sure enough, there's people there with cameras, and I'm like, "Hey, what are you looking at?" And you just connect. So yeah, get outside, go be a part of things. Um, let's see, kind of goes into what I was going to say for this slide. Relationships are everything. For me, I have had a chance to build some incredible relationships with people. And for this job in Africa, I was lucky enough to tap into one relationship I've been connected to for many years, which is Travel and Leisure. We've been contributing to their community for over 6 million or of over 6 million followers for many, many years. And when we talk to Malatini, they're like, "Hey, what can we do socially?" So we're like, "Yeah, we can post for you guys and do stories." And we're also connected with Travel and Leisure. I think we could do like a fun, video for both platforms for both communities. And sure enough, they were interested. We reached out to TNL. They were like, we're interested. And part of that whole connecting with other people, it took, we've been connected and contributing to TNL for 4 or 5 years, and this is the first thing we really did. And now they're working with my wife, which also puts me in the mix, because I shoot and do a lot with her too. Now we're creating videos for travel and leisure. So in the next couple months, you're going to see two, three, four videos featuring us and our experiences, and we're going to keep going with other things on the docket. But having that relationship and connecting with them for years and years of effort, not because I ever wanted to get paid or work with them, but just because I love what they're doing. I love how they're featuring the community and it aligns with what I'm doing. It can go somewhere down the road. So you just have to stay persistent and keep connecting with people. I had a question most people would be surprised by the answer. What do I do with media kits? Do I send out media kits to travel agencies? And I think I've sent one really good media kit my entire life. Instagram has always been that tool for me to connect. I put a lot of effort into curating my experience and what I shoot on there, and that's kind of like a portfolio in and of itself. But more times than not, I go back to relationships are key. It's the most important thing for me. It's what's really unlocked jobs and effort that I get to put into these jobs. It's just so important to be communicative, to talk with people, to showcase your ideas. If you have a vision and you can reach out to a brand and you can say, hey, I'm going to Yosemite and I just have this crazy idea I wanted to share with you guys. Can I put a paddleboard on the Merced River? I know it's been done, but I have some unique angles in mind I think would be really cool. And sometimes those brands or whoever you're reaching out to, they might be interested in stuff like that. So you just have to put yourself out there and see what you can do. I encourage you guys, when you're working with brands, don't give too much content. If you shoot 100 photos, don't give that brand everything. I made that mistake early on, and then I have clients that are buying exclusive private imagery that they want to share on their feed, and they say, hey, do you have anything from this area, from this place, or of an owl or whatever it is that's never been purchased? And if I already gave it to a brand, I can't sell it. So it's very important to hold on to some imagery that belongs to you. You don't need to give everyone everything. I would just think about that as you start working within the travel space, if that's what you're looking towards. Man, I'm going all over the place. I hope I'm not using too much time here. Going to try to get these questions and maybe get to the last few slides I have. Do you make large prints? Are you hampered by the limited pixel capability of the omsystem cameras? Limited versus, say, Nikon Z7 II or Z8 carrying significant pixel capability. So for me, I thought a long time ago that I'd be selling prints by now, knowing that I want to travel and do these things. But the effort I put into it many years ago just wasn't financially keeping me going. And I think it's because the areas that I focus in, people like Brooke, as I mentioned earlier, they're so focused on the wildlife space. It allows them to tap more into the large print stuff, which I envy and I appreciate and I'm all supportive of. But for me, working in the commercial travel space and working with brands, I I don't need to sell prints. It's not something that I have felt I need to start working on. Do I want to at some point in life? I'd love to. I don't necessarily feel hampered by any limited pixel capability, which goes to say if I'm shooting in low light settings and it's a fast motion pelican like you see in front of you, that could be very complicated. No matter what camera you're using, you might be hampered because it's dark and the bird's moving fast, and it just might not be something that is in the greatest of situations for you to sell. So for me, if I were to pursue large prints, you do have high res mode on the OM system gear, which very easily can replicate any high pixel capability camera you're looking to compare it to. I would say to do large prints, I would need to slow down a little bit, probably not shoot manual as heavily as I do, which also jeopardizes who I am. So I'm probably not going to pursue that as commonly. But I definitely have imagery that is perfect and great resolution that I could sell if I wanted to. I just haven't yet. So Another question, what monopod do I use? I have a ProMaster. Um, I forget the exact name of it, but it's made by ProMaster. I don't think they have a lot of monopods. One thing I love about it is I can just extend it like 10 feet high, and I can get like put my camera on a timer on a 10-second timer. I can hold it up and try to get more of an aerial perspective when I can't fly drone. More times than not, unless I'm shooting birds exclusively that day, probably also not using a tripod or a monopod, but I do use that one when I do. Um, do you shoot in portrait mode or make the images portrait and post-processing? So I do not post-process that heavily where I'm like trying to significantly change images. My post-processing is actually pretty simple. I've developed a filter that I apply across the board. It's very basic. It changes a few things that I need to fine tune. But more commonly, I'm working within exposure, contrast, a little bit of dehaze, highlights, messing with my blacks because I do like kind of, enriching the blacks a little bit. White, depending on how much sky or color during sunsets involved. I have not messed with like AI too much. I know it's like the trend. It's just not really my thing as of right now. And more times than not, if I'm shooting portrait, I am using my 17 millimeter 1.2 lens to get that low depth of field, and I will do it myself in camera as I'm shooting. John wants me to talk about post processing, which I do have on one of these slides. I guess I can jump to it real quick. So as I said, base filter, colors are my primary focus, specifically my yellows and greens. I'll mess with those pretty frequently on the HSL curve. Also adding a little bit of vibrance and saturation. Everyone says like find a mood, find a style that meets you, that establishes your stamp on your photography. But for me, colors, I would say, are my stamp. So I try to work within colors very, very frequently in my post processing. I'm fairly quick on that front. Usually I can edit 1,000 photos within a few hours because I'm not going in depth on stuff unless it's like my favorite 10 or 20 from a shoot. Africa, Greenland, Amazon, obviously those projects require a lot more for me, so I'm spending a couple weeks just going back and forth and looking through these things. I cull on Lightroom's on the library tab, but you could also mess with why am I blanking on the name? Photo Mechanic to cull, which is great for workflow if you've never messed with it. Again, for me, it's all about minor adjustments. I lean into radial and linear gradients as I hit on when I was talking about the live G&D stuff. That's one of the biggest things that I love to focus on because usually to bring more focus on subject, if you can add some linear and radial gradients, it really helps kind of deepen that portrait feel, I guess I was talking about a minute ago, even though it's not so much about that. Yeah, so recently got to go to Yellowstone. One thing I want to talk of here is like I've been dreaming of going to Yellowstone in the winter for a long time, shooting that snowy bison look. Not a wildlife photographer. I don't sell that stuff, but for me, I'm interested in it. So I wanted to work with the tourism brand. We work with Yellowstone Vacations out there, and they took us around in their super coach, dead of winter. It was awesome. Super fun shooting those landscapes. But for me, one of my last things of encouragement is don't be afraid to reach out to brands, guys. If that's what you're looking to get involved with, how you want to monetize, whatever it is, when you do it, be stoked, be excited to connect with them. Try to be personal with your connection to the brand if you have it. Treat those client relationships very, very simple with good communication. Don't be a partner. Don't approach them like you're a business partner and you just want to do work together. Treat them like friends. It sounds silly, but when I'm personal and I'm approaching people, it's amazing where that can take you. I'll say it real briefly. I work with American Express, as I mentioned earlier, but that relationship and how much it's grown for me came from working with Hertz 7 years ago. Made a great impression on the director of content, whatever her title was at the moment. We became good friends. We didn't work together for like 3 years, but we stayed in contact. It wasn't like, how are you? How's the kids? It was just like following each other on Instagram, hearting her stuff, making sure that we're connected in any capacity, showcasing myself. So she's still connected to me. And sure enough, 5 years later, it gets me involved with American Express, which was like an absolutely dream client. So think to yourself, that person that you're in contact with is someone that has pressures above them. Sometimes it's not the CEO and you're working with a rep of some sort. They got pressure on them to do a good job, and that job stems from you. So you have to come through for them. You got to be flexible. You got to be like a friend and communicate thoroughly. You got to stay in touch and stay involved. If you seek those moments of exciting things and not just work, I promise you that when you try to work with brands, it goes a long way. Gear, I said I would talk about gear. Obviously, the micro four thirds system is approximately double the millimeter distance. So when you're working with a 12 to 40 millimeter lens, it's equivalent to a 24 to 80 on a full frame camera. So for me, I shot a lot with that 7 to 14 millimeter almost exclusively for many, many years. 90% of my work came from it. And then I got my hands on that 150 to 400 and it kind of just like opened me up. And now I'm frequently shooting with that a lot. I'm also messing with that 17 millimeter 1.2 Pro for portraits, food, all that stuff. I really love it for that stuff. I do use the 12 to 40 pretty frequently, especially when I'm in places like Tokyo. It's not what I specialize in, but it's fun to be able to mess with a little bit of zoom and still stay wide in moments. My 40 to 150 is just an absolutely game changer. I use it when I'm looking for kind of that middle of the realm lens that I want to be able to shoot anything and everything with. And lastly, I also have a 45 millimeter 1.2 in my bag for the extreme cases of low light portrait focus. Yeah, so shared a bunch of stuff with you guys. I think I got through all the photos. My life, it's all about uncovering new corners of the world, finding that wanderlust, going to shoot things that I really want to do, pursuing my creative interests and passions, having a balance, never losing sight that this isn't just a job for me. I want to shoot things like birds and fun things like my wife and my dog to keep me engaged, to keep me happy, to keep me passionate. That in and of itself will open up a lot of creative opportunities. And lastly, working with companies, finding ones that support you are so cool because they want you to represent them. You want to represent them. And it's not like a job. It's like something you could dream of shooting. So thank you for listening, everyone. Thank you for, stopping by and watching me probably bounce all over the spectrum, but that's kind of how my work goes and what I focus on. And it was an absolute pleasure being here today. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if there's more questions rolling in. Oh, love it. Let's give it a minute for last questions. Anyone have any questions they want to ask? I know there was one on the solar eclipse. I've never actually shot the solar eclipse before, although I do plan to shoot this one in April. So my first step is watching the weather. I'm going to be in Mammoth Lakes, California, where there's little light pollution, and depending on the weather, I might be able to drive north or south so I can get a clear view. Gonna bust out my ProMaster tripod because obviously that's important for that. I ordered solar eclipse glasses. If you don't have them, it's an absolute must when working with a solar eclipse. Do not look through your viewfinder because it can damage your gear without that solar filter on it, and it will not protect the naked eye. Telephoto lens all the way. I'll probably use my 150 to 600 or 400. Try to get real punched in on that moment, on that totality moment. I'll charge the batteries before, make sure my SDs are clear. Probably hook up my shutter release so I don't have any camera wobble in my tripod so I can get a clear shot in that brief moment. I'm going to turn off image stabilization because you're not really detecting motion, which can throw off your focus. So manual focus, working towards that infinite area with minor adjustments. Probably shoot on aperture priority, landing close to f7.1 if I could do it. Shutter speed, I want to be around 1 or 500 or higher, landing close to that. ISO, keep it low, 200, 320, somewhere in there, shooting in RAW. And I'll probably try to bracket a few exposures. But yeah, as far as shooting the solar eclipse, that would be like my brief, you know, insight on that. Um, awesome. Um, I think another question on the eclipse. It just said first recommendation. I think that kind of answers how I'm approaching it. Finding a nice place that's got hard enough ground. If you're, for me, I haven't decided yet if I'm going to explore putting a subject in there, but I might try to find like a like what I've seen in the past, like people doing highlining between two mountain things. I don't know if I'll get that crazy, but if I can find a place to put a subject just standing there using that telephoto and punching in, I'll probably get like within 50 yards from a hill, have someone stand up there and work my way back to see how I can get them smaller within the solar eclipse. I probably won't do a subject for this one, just focusing on the solar eclipse. It's my first time, but um, yeah, filter recommendations. I actually haven't bought a solar filter yet. I know there's a ton of options out there. I will probably start with ProMaster since I've used them when I do use filters, which is not very often, but they have some really high quality glass that I can trust and I know won't like create any distortion or light, leak from the eclipse itself. So I'm going to probably start with ProMaster, and I believe all I'm looking for is a solar filter. That's what it would be labeled as. And if I'm correct, when you shoot totality, so if you're shooting the, sun and the moon arriving towards each other, you're going to want to keep that solar filter on. But at that brief moment of totality, when they line up, you want to take that filter off, because I don't believe it's needed, if I'm correct in what I've researched. Um, John, do you use the OM or external charger to charge batteries? I use mostly that double external charger because I have enough batteries on site that I can keep them plugged in while I'm out in the field, and I can work within that and have extra still. But if I'm ever driving and I like forgot my batteries or just want to charge up a little bit, I'll plug my OM one Mark II into the car into the USB and just have it charging while we're going if we're on a road trip. That's not terribly uncommon for me. Do you use stacking or bracketing for your landscape work? Not too common. I have bracketed several times when I feel like the lighting is asking for it or needing it. But more times than not, I don't typically stack unless it's like some sort of a nighttime thing, which I have not had a lot of time to focus on in the last year or two. But I will bracket from time to time, yes. Thank you guys for all the compliments. Appreciate it. Awesome. I think that's it. Have a great day, guys. Go get outside. Go explore. Go do as much as you guys can. I appreciate it.